I'm Mark Boris, and this is Straight Talk.
Peter Dutton, welcome back to Straight Talk, mate.
Great to be with you, Mark. Thank you.
Been a bit hectic.
It's been a bit on, mate. There's no sleep at the moment, but we're just going 24/7 until polls close on Saturday night.
Did you ever have any concept of how, I use the word hectic, how sort of crazy this is, like running for, the leader of the party as opposed to just your normal seat? Do you have any sense of it?
Look, I've been around. I've served 4 prime ministers, so I've seen different campaigns, and I've been in the leadership group and watched it pretty, sort of ringside for a long time. But until you're in the ring and you're just going round after round, it can be exhausting, but it's also exhilarating, mate. I mean, we've met some just amazing people. We were up in Townsville the other day on Anzac Day, meeting with young diggers up there in the RSL. And, they want selfies and all that sort of stuff. But you're standing there thinking, you know what, this young bloke, 21, 22 years of age, has such a love for our country that he's prepared to trade his life to keep my kids, my grandkids safe in our country. And all of that provides you, I think, just with fuel in the tank to think, you know what, this is worth fighting for, and we're in a great country, and I need to step up and make sure we protect our country and get it back on track.
You got the fight still in you?
100%. Yeah. I never give in, and I've always had that as my maxim over life, to make sure that you double down and you stand up for what you believe in, and there's no sitting on the fence. You need to tell people and be clear about what your values are, what you stand for. And if you try and please everyone in this job, you end up, I think, standing for nothing. And there are good and bad people on both sides of politics, but the worst ones are those that get to the end of their career and nobody can tell you what they stood for or what they believed in. What's the point of public service if you can't stand up for the values that you really strongly believe in and want to adhere to?
Anything that surprised you?
The negative campaigns and the lies that have come from Labor in this campaign. As I say, I've been in Parliament almost 25 years, and politicians can be accused of telling fibs or lies or whatever, but I've never seen a leader look down the barrel of the camera like this one, and he just lies, like just flat out tells people black is white, and even when he's pulled up on it, he dances around. And I've seen different Labor and Liberal leaders, get caught out, and most of them, respect the truth and adhere to that. But this is a different scenario. So I've been really surprised by the depth of the lies, and I think, though, I've got an incredible faith in the Australian people, and I think over the last 4 or 5 days, people are starting to say, actually, you know what, that doesn't add up, what he's saying. And I know that not to be true, what I just heard him say. And we've seen it because we've had 4 debates now, and people have done their research. And I think as we get closer to the election, momentum is starting to swing back toward the Liberal Party. And I think that will, by 6 p.m. on Saturday night, see us in a very strong position, one in which I think we can win.
It's just funny. I've been through a lot of elections too, and not in the same capacity as you, but as a voter. And I don't think I've ever heard anybody be called a liar. I don't think people have challenged a proposition that opposing people have put up, but I don't really ever remember hearing anyone call anyone a liar. And actually, one of the things that has come out of this whole campaign from both sides is that I've actually heard you say that the Prime Minister is weak, yet he's somehow surged ahead of you guys in the polls, so-called polls. We'll talk about that in a moment, but it looks as though at least the media are putting him as a winner. I can't reconcile that stuff.
Well, a couple of points. One is you don't lead the left of the Labor Party for 20 years if you don't have some mongrel in you, so there's no question about that. But weak in the sense that he hasn't been able to stand up, for example, to Kevin Rudd, who demanded to go to the United States as our ambassador and has been a failure, really. Weak in the sense that he wasn't prepared to explain the detail of the voice to the Australian people, even though it was promised, but he never had any intention of doing that. Weak in the sense that they've made decisions to spend a lot of money when they should have been taking the foot off the accelerator so that interest rates didn't stay as high as they have. They've gone up on 12 occasions. They've only come back once, and that's only by 0.25 of 1%. And weak in the sense that he hasn't been able to stand up and make the decision to invest into keeping us safe as a community, and people feel less safe in their communities. And I think we're less safe as a country because the government's taken money out of defence as well in a very uncertain period. So I think there's that element to it. If you step back, though, as you know, as best I can, and I'm, as I say, sort of in the arena, but what they've done is they have just plastered a negative campaign against us over the course of the last few weeks. Why would they do that? Like their campaign can't be, look, vote for Labor at this election because you're paying $300 a month less for your groceries. You're paying $200 less a month for your electricity bill, or $275 less, or you're paying $150 less a month for your insurance premiums. Gas has gone up by 34%. Electricity's up by 32%. Groceries is up by 30%. And people know in their own budgets that they're struggling to keep their heads above water. So they had to go negative because they can't talk about the achievements of the last 3 years and how people are better off. 30,000 small businesses have gone broke. So that's why I think we've seen the level of negativity, the depth of that negativity and the Labor lies. The Prime Minister talks about Medicare. Bulk billing rates are down by 11% under his watch. People are paying $43 out of pocket to go and see a GP. In some cases, they're cancelling or not making appointments to go to see a doctor because they haven't got the $43 to fork out of their budget for a doctor's visit. And that's if you listen to their campaign, they've been the greatest friend of Medicare ever. It's just not the reality.
But then how does he? Is it a reflection on the voting population, or is it that he's able then to swap over the national polls, which is different to seat-by-seat poll, but the national polls that the media keep trotting out? How has he been able to swap that over from the coalition being ahead, let's say beginning of January, late last year, to according to the current position looking as though you're behind? Is he just a good politician?
I think he's a tricky politician. I think he's demonstrated that, and the negative campaign has had an impact. I do think, though, over the last 4 or 5 days, and you can see this in the internal track polling, it is starting to shift, and people are starting to see through the negative campaign. The campaign is and momentum starting to come back. We see it on the pre-poll as well. Talking to marginal seat members and candidates in our key seats, there's a really positive sentiment on pre-polling since it's opened. Now, that'll be some Liberal Party voters coming out early, particularly older Australians who are really worried about unrealised capital gains tax. They're worried about where the economy's going. They're worried that their kids and grandkids can't get housing. So there'll be that element to the voter sentiment at the moment. But there is still a lot of people who are undecided, a lot of people who don't take much interest in politics at all will start to switch on over the next few days. And I think there are a lot of people who have listened to the Labor Party pitch and may have been taken first up by it, but now realise, hang on, that doesn't make sense. Medicare's not, going to see a doctor is not cheaper than it was a few years ago. And am I better off today than I was 3 years ago? Well, for a lot of families, no. And it's not just a referendum. This election is not just a referendum on the campaign of the last few weeks and who's held more babies and, who's visited more seats or done more flights or anything like that. This is a referendum on the last 3 years. And I don't think people forget that. And it's also about, well, are you better off in 3 years' time having re-elected a Labor Greens government, or are you better off with Labor being out of power and the Liberals managing the economy effectively again and keeping us safe and realising the dream of home ownership again?
So I received a text last night, interestingly enough, and unsolicited and more random than anything, from Jeff Wilson. And
I thought you were going to say Clive Palmer for a second. But,
no, I've got a few of those. Yes, I have had a few of those. Trumpet a Patriot once. But I received this text from Jeff Wilson. Jeff Wilson runs a fund, and he's a very successful guy here in Sydney. And he sent me a copy of a paper about unrealised gains, capital gains in super funds and the proposed tax on those gains. And I thought, wow, that's knowing I was seeing you today, that is a really important point I need to put to you. And I said to Jeff I would put it to you. He's a good friend of mine. I said I would put it to you. And he's actually prepared a white paper on it, or his organisation prepared a white paper on it, which I might actually send over to you. And
sure.
But where everyone's forgotten about this. I think the amount is $3 million. If you have in your super fund, because you've worked hard and you've been able to contribute over 1 million years, enough money to get over $3 million worth of assets, but you haven't sold them, they're just valued at that. Under the proposal by the Labor Party, which is what Jeff was bringing to my attention last night again, was that you'll be paying tax on that. And I don't know how you pay tax on an unrealised gain. I don't know where you get the money from to pay tax on something as unrealised, because you don't have the cash, because you haven't realised the gain. What's the position of the Liberal Party, of the coalition, on this stuff?
So, Mark, we opposed it straight away when the government proposed it, and they've tried now, I think, to sort of push the boundaries on this. They've done research on abolition of negative gearing and cutting out the discount on capital gains tax on the sale of an asset held for longer than 12 months as well. So I think there is a broader issue here of credibility. So the Prime Minister went to the last election saying no changes to super tax, and of course this change then came in. And I equate it to, if you're a wage earner, if you're a tradie or you are working for a boss, it's like charging you tax, like you're having to pay the tax office the tax before you get paid your wage for that week. And if you're in a super fund and you've got a farm in that super fund, which many rural families do, or if you're a family, maybe second, third generation family with a block of shops or a couple of units, or if you've got shares that have just done really well, you've picked a couple of cracking shares that have taken off. For that 12-month period, you might have seen an increase in value in the block of flats or in the price of your shares. You haven't realised the gain. So if the price has gone from $1 up to $5, you're taxed on that capital gain. And the next 12 months, the shares might come back. There might be a crash. The valuation that you've had to pay for again for the building that you've got in your super fund might show that prices have come off, or perhaps you've got vacancies and the yield's gone down in relation to the shops that you've got.
It could be a recession and all that.
It could be anything, right? You could have a development application that's approved. You've sunk a lot of money into getting the development application, and it increases the price of the block of land that you're holding or whatever it is. You're going to pay tax under Labor's model, and it raises a few $1 billion, so they know that it's really going to hurt. And if you're in a super fund and you haven't got much cash in the super fund, if you are a farmer, for example, and you've got limits as to how much money you can put on depending on how old you are, as to how much money you can put into that fund, you might be forced into a position where you've got to sell the asset to pay the tax bill. And I just think it's unjust and it's unfair. And
but it's also nonsense.
Well, it absolutely it is. But it captures, like people might say now, $3 million in your super fund, if only. But this will capture with inflation people over the coming years. It's not indexed, so the $3 million doesn't go up each year. So this will capture more and more taxpayers each year. And as I say, if you've inherited some money and you've put it into your super, or you've just listened to the financial advisors who have said, okay, pile as much money as you can into super because it's a safe asset class, you're now going to come within scope over the course of the next few years. Like, we've fought really hard against this. Labor and the Greens strongly support it. And again, I think it gives a window into Labor's thinking. It's that we can take money away from you because we think you've done too well. And that's sort of the socialism that's at operation, that's at the heart of the operation of the Labor and Greens parties, that it's wealth redistribution. And Jeff Wilson, who I know well also, one of the smartest financial minds in the country, he's horrified by all of this, and most financial advisors are.
Paul Keating would be horrified by it.
Paul Keating would be. He wouldn't recognise it in terms of what the Labor Party is proposing here. And it provides a disincentive as well, because a lot of financial advisors will be saying to younger people, look, actually, I wouldn't be putting that much money into super now because it's just risky. We don't know whether the $3 million is going to be brought down if Labor needs to create more tax and more revenue. Maybe they'll drop the $3 million down to $2 million and you'll be captured by that. So the whole idea of super is that it's a safe place to invest and it's going to provide for your retirement. But if you take away that certainty, younger people are just going to say, well, actually, no, I'm not going to tip money into to super and, we sold, a car or a boat, instead of spending that money, we're going to dump it into super. Those people will stop doing that. And I think that's, I think that is a really bad outcome. Not enough people are talking about it. And as I say, it also then says, well, if Anthony Albanese told you before the last election that there were not going to be any tax changes around super, he's saying the same thing now around the family home. But we know that they've done the work on what negative gearing abolition looks like and what the abolition of the CGT 50% discount looks like as well. So that I think gives a window into the thinking of the Labor Party, and that they'll always want to tax more because they always want to spend more. But that's what puts interest rates up as well.
I hope you don't mind if I don't want to labour this point, but it's quite important to someone like me. I think about the kids, the 20-year-old kids. Let's call them even the 15-year-old kids, but maybe they're not voting. But let's say your grandkids or my grandkids, in my case, or I could be thinking about young people who are just turning 20, getting the first job. They're going to work for 45 years.
Yes.
And they're going to be putting the money into this great thing that, look, let's give it to Keating. Great thing that Keating came up with in the 90s. A great thing. And it's about building up enough wealth so you can retire comfortably, because every Australian works their butt off and they deserve to retire comfortably.
100%.
And the whole regime about this is having concessional tax rates on your super fund and the money the super fund made. That's the whole premise. A kid who's 20 in 45 years' time will probably will have to have more than $3 million worth of assets to be able to live comfortably.
No doubt about that.
And so that person right now want to get their act together and think about what they're going to do, because if this goes through, this is an existential threat to what was originally designed by Jim Chalmers's greatest person in his life, Paul Keating. And I just can't believe that they actually even talking about it or considering it. Is this a real risk of getting a pass by it through Parliament?
Well, yes. And again, it wasn't, nothing was mentioned about it before the election. It's one of the key broken promises. And to your point too, which I think is really well made, that the reason that we've got a concessional taxation arrangement, that is people are paying lower tax in super when the money's compounding and you're earning and building that nest egg up, is because it's your money ultimately. Whilst the boss takes it out before you see it and sends it off to your super fund, it's your money and you can't access it. So the price that we as a government are saying to you for putting that money aside, not being able to use it to buy a boat or go on a holiday or whatever it might be, is that we're going to tax you at a lower rate because we want you to be self-sufficient in retirement, because we've got an ageing population, more people on pensions. And your point is spot on, where you've worked your guts out your whole life. We want you to be able to enjoy your retirement, and super is part of the way in which you're going to be able to do that. But the government just upends all of that logic and thinking that Keating first had in mind. And it's just a tax grab. And it's even worse than that, because you're saying to somebody, okay, we're going to have to pay a valuer during the course of every financial year to work out whether the asset's gone up or down during the course of that year.
Do they understand the cost of valuers for real estate? They charge a percentage of the valuation.
Like thousands and thousands of dollars. So the valuers will be happy because they're going to be paid to do these desktop audits or whatever. I don't know the level of detail. The government hasn't released how much money you'd have to spend in an average super fund to comply with the new change. And there are, as I say, like you get fluctuations in different assets that you've got in your superannuation, whether it's shares or whether it's real property or whatever it might be. So I think there's a real problem here, and I think it shows the difference between the two parties. The Liberal Party will always be better economic managers because most of us come from a business background. Most of us know how to manage money. We've started businesses. We've worked really closely, in my case with Peter Costello and with John Howard. And part of the reason that the economy is suffering at the moment is because there are now 4 budgets where the government has made decisions that have just made life much harder, and people feel that in their own household budgets.
When we talk about that tax on assets of a superannuation fund, I feel as though I'm playing a game of Monopoly and I just landed on the chance square and I've lifted up my chance card and it says pay tax.
Yeah.
It's like a prosperity tax.
Yes.
It's like I've been prosperous for the 12 months as a result of the advice that my advisors have given me as to what I should be buying and investing and has done well. As a result of that prosperity, you got to pay tax. It doesn't mean I made the money. I didn't earn the dough. It's not too different what Dan Andrews put into Victoria for farmers who have had their land rezoned,
Yes.
where the land's gone from being a farm worth one price to being rezoned for housing and become much more valuable. And Dan Andrews went and taxed them before they sold it. And these poor bloody farmers have been forced to sell their property to pay the tax.
That's right. They haven't got the cash, the lazy cash sitting around to pay the uplift tax like that. It's and I mean, this is a really interesting point as well, because if Labor's logic is that can apply within superannuation, well, why not outside of super?
Yeah.
So if you've
That's
got,
scary.
yeah, it's really scary, but it would generate them a lot of money. People would pay a lot of tax, and again, I sort of bring it back to the basic point that if you're a tradie and you're getting, however much a week, $1,000 a week, you're being asked to pay the tax man the $200 a week before you get the $1,000. Or before you get the 800, and it's wrong in principle, and it discourages investment, and it undermines the certainty about investing in this country, and that's exactly what we've seen in Victoria, where businesses have just pulled money out. They've gone to Adelaide or they've gone to Sydney or Brisbane, and they're employing workers there. And the Labor Party's devastated the Victorian economy, and a lot of Victorians are very angry about it, and rightly so.
It's very interesting. I got quite a lot of branches down in Brisbane, Victoria, and I used to go down there, and they'd always say to me, Dan Andrews this, Dan Andrews that, and then I used to say, but how come he keeps getting in? But now, what's interesting, the mood has completely swung against Dan Andrews and his successors in Victoria in terms of the Labor Party, like completely swung.
Yes, yeah, I think that's right.
And because people eventually worked out that Andrews was just running the joint into the ground. And he was a big spender, like a massive spender. And now he's turned the place into a tax haven for government. And what I mean by that is not tax haven for consumers, but government there, like the property market in Victoria has suffered because if you own an investment, you pay land tax on the first after the first $50,000 of valuation.
Yes.
Whereas New South Wales is something like 1.15 or something like that, 1.15 million. And the house price is going down. Real estate investment down there is at an all-time low. And as a result of that, less people buying houses. That means they're collecting less stamp duty and they're getting into a bigger hole. And the hole's getting deeper and deeper and deeper. Do you see that? Is that a mentality? Is that a Labor Party mentality? It eventually gets them?
It is. It's a jealousy thing. And it's if you have a look back through the history of this country, where there's only so much tax that people who work hard can pay. And you get to a tipping point where they say, you know what, I'm just withdrawing my effort and I'm not going to build that house or I'm not going to build that block of units. And it's almost what's happened in the construction sector with the involvement of the CFMEU. I mean, the CFMEU's donated about $12 million to the Labor Party since Anthony Albanese became leader. And so they've let the CFMEU just run riot in the building sector. Productivity's down to about 2.5 days a week, which means it takes twice as long and twice the cost to build an apartment block. And in Victoria, all of that capital is being withdrawn and moved to other states, to New South Wales, for example, as you point out. And at a time when we should be seeing an encouragement to invest into, say, housing, when we need more houses coming online, people are just saying, well, the taxes are too great, and I'm just not going to be this sort of soft target any longer. And my point before about if it's logical for Jim Chalmers and Anthony Albanese to tax you in that way in superannuation, why not in your other investments, and why not on your house? If your house is worth more than $1 million, and my house is only worth $500,000, then the logic is that you should pay tax so that I can be subsidised in another way. I mean, that is just socialism. It's withdrawing the encouragement, the incentive for entrepreneurialism and for people to invest and grow their businesses, and that ultimately means that less taxes paid, more public servants, become employed, and a lot of that's happened over the last few years, particularly in Victoria.
So someone else raised another interesting point with me, a well-known economist, so I won't drag him into the conversation, but he raised his point with me. If you look at the credit rating of New South Wales compared to Victoria, Victorians have to pay a higher interest rate on money that Victorian government borrows relative to what we have to do here in New South Wales, because the credit rating in New South Wales is higher than the credit rating in Victoria. And I see today that Standard & Poor's are concerned about the long series from now on, the long series of deficits we're going to have, which means we've either got to raise the money in the markets, go and borrow money as a country.
Yes.
And we keep hearing this number of $1 trillion or $1 trillion plus in debt. And either that or we've got to tax more, or both, in order to fund the deficit. Standard & Poor's are a pretty tough organisation. They don't muck around. And once you get a downgrade from them, it's very hard to get regraded back up. And Australia as a country, not state by state, but as a country, has enjoyed a AAA rating for a long, long time, which is a rare thing. Like, not many countries in the world have this, which means we pay the lowest, as a country, when we borrow money, we pay the lowest possible interest rate, which is great, which means, we feel more encouraged that we can borrow more money. But if we keep borrowing money, Standard & Poor's going to get nervous, because investors will sue them. This is what happened during the GFC.
Yes.
If they don't properly rate a country. In other words, they think you're spending too much. So I'd like to ask you this. I know you're not the treasurer, but it doesn't matter. You're the leader of the party, and I know you understand economics. What is the danger of running deficits year in, year out for a 10-year period, having to tap the markets all the time, when already we have an example of what's happening in Victoria? We have that example, but when already the Standard & Poor rating agency, the global rating agency, is already starting to think about this. What's the danger of that, and what will you, as a leader of your party, do to try and manage this?
Well, Mark, the risk compounds each year, as you point out, because you've got a $30 billion deficit one year, and add that on top of the debt that you've already got, so it goes, from $1 trillion up, and this government projects it'll go to $1.2 trillion. So they have deficits in every year that they forecast. And it's like having your credit card maxed out each month and pretending that if you get sick or you lose your job or you need to replace the fridge that's broken down unexpectedly, that you're going to be able to do that. At some stage, you can't do it. And your point is exactly right in terms of Standard & Poor now, in terms of what they've said. So they're basically firing a shot across the bow to say, look, we think Labor government's spending a lot of money. They talked about off-budget funds. So these are all the green energy funds that they're continuing to fund in the tens of billions of dollars.
Which do not appear in the budget.
That's right. So they're off-budget, and they're still, though, taken into account in terms of our credit worthiness. So the point is that Australia becomes much riskier, and the price you pay for those borrowings, as you point out, goes higher, and it becomes this vicious cycle. And as your credit rating deteriorates, you're paying more and more for the bank. No different than if a person with a bad credit rating goes to borrow money from the bank as opposed to somebody who's got an impeccable credit rating, you'll pay different interest rates because the risk is higher if you've got a bad track record. And this also happened with the Reserve Bank governor, who's independent from the government, who has been warning the government over the last few years, look, if you keep spending money like you are, and this is the biggest spending government in the last 40 years, you're going to end up with higher interest rates. Well, guess what? They've gone up 12 occasions since the government's been elected, come back by a quarter, as we said before. And I think people thought, if it's come back by 0.25, there'll be, another 25 points next month and another 50 points the month after. That hasn't happened. Because
and there's no guarantee it will.
Well, there's not. And as we know, with what we're seeing internationally at the moment, the uncertainty in Europe and in the Middle East and the tariff debate, the talk of a global recession is real. And if that happens, we don't have any money in the bank to pay for what we need to pay for to get through that rainy day. One of the things that we had going for us going into COVID was that we'd got the budget back into balance after years and years of Labor deficits, after Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard. And it took us a number of years. And it's exactly history repeating itself, given that it happened for John Howard as well. When he came into government after the Keating years, they had $96 billion of debt in those days, a lot of money in 1996. And it took them year after year to go through the budget, find where the waste was, cut the waste out, trim down on spending where you can, still provide the essential services, but got the budget back into balance and then put it into surplus. And then they created the Future Fund. And that Future Fund still sits there today. Labor's never created a Future Fund because they never run surplus budgets. They got 2 surpluses at the start of this term only because of the fact that we'd put the budget into a good position when they came into government. But then for every year after that, as we pointed out before, there's just red ink in every projection. So it's putting us in a weaker position. And I think that's what the credit agencies are saying now. And we need to heed that advice and make sure that we spend money wisely. The other point, of course, is that if you're somebody at the moment who's just taken a second job, maybe a shift at the bottle-o or at the servo on a Saturday night because you just can't pay the bills, you want to know that when you're paying that tax from your second job and from your first job, maybe your third job as well, that your taxes are being spent wisely. And if you've trimmed back every dollar of discretionary spend in your own household budget, or as a small business, every cost has gone up, your sales have gone down, and your profit margins are really tight, you want to know when you're paying tax that the federal government is spending that tax wisely. And at the moment, I don't think people believe that that's the case under this government. So we have to spend money wisely because ultimately the government has no money, only the monies they collect in taxes from hardworking Australians.
I mean, for those people who want somebody to address that, or someone who has addressed that in the past, all you need to go is on YouTube and have a look at Kerry Packer addressing the Senate, saying you guys don't really know how to spend the money that you're trying to raise from everybody. And actually, that's existed forever.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important point. We should not be seduced during these campaigns into thinking, oh, wow, there's something more in it for me. There's a bit more money for me. There's a bit more money for me. When in actual fact, people got to be very, very careful because ultimately it's got to come from somewhere.
Yes. And
we did talk about Standard & Poor's. We did talk about the borrowing of money. You did mention something very interesting to me, and I'm reminded of another conversation because I'm talking to economists all the time. Another economist conversation I had the other day, and he was talking about the Howard period, and of course John Howard is still around today, extraordinarily, one of the icons of the Liberal Party, but a great manager of this country. Him and Costello, but he was at the helm, and in 1996, and just prior to that period, during the Keating-Hawke period, interest rates got up to extraordinary heights, as did inflation. But post-96, right through to right up into the COVID period, the inflation number in Australia sat between 2% and 3% for 20-odd years as a result of what John Howard did after that period of Keating and Hawke. That's Howard and Costello, a great team. And they were in government for a long, long time. And they didn't go right through to 2020, of course, but that momentum carried through for that period, right through a GFC. I mean, we had a blip in the GFC, but we got under control. I worry that we're heading through another tumultuous high inflation period. We might get 1 or 2 reductions, but it could come back very, very quickly. I'm worried about that process happening again. Does that something that goes through your head and your parties and your senior advisors within your party? Do you feel a responsibility to sort of bring back that low inflation period to Australia like we had for 20-odd years? Because Australia was one of the few countries in the world was able to do that.
Yes.
Very few countries could do it.
Well, the answer is yes, and it's instinctive because this is the reason that we've got prices, just going through the roof right across the economy. We were at BlueScope the other day, the biggest manufacturers of steel in Australia, Colorbond Roofing, steel frames for housing. They're paying 3 times the cost for electricity now, and 3 times the cost of gas. And obviously they're huge energy users. They've got furnaces and pumping out steel and products that we use to build homes and buildings. And it's 3 times the cost of their same factory in the United States. Now, it's unsustainable. You go to Brickworks, same story, 3 times what they're paying in the US. So those 2 core elements to construction, bricks and steel, we're paying the highest cost really in the world. It's not sustainable. And so inflation's everywhere across the economy, and it's being driven by a number of things. Core inflation is twice that of our G7 countries. Now, just spend a moment on that. When you think, why haven't interest rates gone further down when they've gone down in the United States and down in the UK and down in Canada
and Europe
and down, absolutely,
and New Zealand
and New Zealand
UK
as well? Why have they dropped there and they started to drop 6 months before here? Why have we had the biggest drop in living standards in our country's history over the last 3 years? And why are we living with the lowest living standards compared to comparable nations at the moment? Well, there's a bit to unpack there, but one of the reasons I think is because the government has been running an inflationary budget. They've been fueling inflation, which is why that core inflation rate is still held very high. And that's why interest rates aren't coming down. And this is what the Reserve Bank governor's warned about. But also the energy policy, which has just been a train wreck. It has actually just been a wrecking ball through the economy.
No, so I haven't heard from Chris Bowen for a long time.
No, he's in witness protection. He's not allowed out.
I'm serious. I wasn't trying to be funny, but I don't think I've seen Chris Bowen's pop up anywhere.
No,
for 3 months.
No, they've had him out of the public eye because when people see him, they just know straight away he's the bloke, along with Anthony Albanese, that's driven my power prices up by over 30%. Now, again, we were talking with. We're down in Nowra today with Andrew Constance, and we went to a small business owned by 2 brothers, started it from scratch, and it's a pretty big footprint. They've got fruit and veg, but they also do, grocery lines, and they've got meat and dairy, etc. They were saying there that they're just about to, negotiate their contracts, etc., and their power prices are up by about 40%.
Wow.
Now, if your power bill goes up by $6,000 or $8,000 a month and your wage bill's gone up, your rent's gone up, the cost of every other input, you're running delivery trucks around, etc., all of that is either consumed by the business, absorbed by the business, which is more and more unlikely because the profit margins just aren't there. What's happening is the cost increases are being passed on. And it's not just there on the shop floor. If you go back through the supply chain, the farmer is paying a lot more for fertiliser now because there's a lot of gas used in the generation of fertiliser. And the jars that they're buying to put the fruit in ultimately that end up on the shelf, the glass manufacturer under the renewables only policy of Chris Bowen and Anthony Albanese, they're paying more for the manufacture of those glasses. So every point in the supply chain, the farmer, the cold storage, the processing plant, the energy that's used to provide, the processing or manufacturing of food or clothing or motor vehicles, whatever it is, all of that has increased under this government, and that's applied across the economy. So a few of the things that we've said, okay, well, what do you do about that? Well, I think the way in which we can fix the problem up, as John Howard did with the Keating problem, is the 25 cent a litre cut in fuel tax. In that means straight away across the economy. So the delivery truck drivers, the fishing charter business, the pensioner, the uni student, the tradies running 3 or 4 trucks around, the mums and dads, you come down by about $14 a tank. And if you're a 2-car family, that's saving you money straight away. So it removes every week, and it removes some of the cost pressure out of that family budget or that small business budget. Then we say, okay, we'll give you $1,200 back of tax that you've paid, $1,200 tax rebate for people on incomes up to $144,000.
So it is means tested?
It's means tested. And it means for a 2-income average household, $2,400 back. So that's the immediate relief to help people now. What do we do then to fix up the broader problem that Chris Bowen and Anthony Albanese have created? We have a huge export market for our gas, for our natural gas. Fantastic, because it creates revenues and royalties and taxes being paid. But we can divert some of that which is being exported now,
or reserve
beyond the reserves of it, and increase the amount of gas that we're producing. Flood the market, flood the domestic market with that gas, and bring the price down. And we cap the price, and we say to those companies that you're going to be required to sell that into the Australian market. Now, the independent analysis that's been done by Frontier Economics, probably the best economists in the country on energy policy, they say that that'll bring gas down by 23%, the wholesale price. So that means BlueScope paying less for their gas. It means that the local Chinese shop paying less for their gas. It means the gas used in the production of electricity comes down in cost as well. So the cost of electricity can come down for households, but for businesses as well. And if we fix up that energy disaster that they've created and ultimately bring in our baseload power, which we believe should be nuclear, zero emissions nuclear, that on the analysis brings our electricity cost down by 44%. And that's how we can be competitive as a country again, and how we can reduce the cost of groceries and reduce the cost of all of those household budget items at the moment that are just crushing families.
So it's a good point. You're doing it. It's all very well to say we will reduce the cost of living, but you've got to actually have some policies, and you've just announced a number of policies there that they all make sense to me, particularly the fuel excise. I mean, I just can't believe that 25 cents a litre. I mean, if for some reason the price of oil dropped by 25 cents and petrol at the bowels would become 25 cents less, if for some reason that happened, people would be, sort of cheering and going crazy. And they say it's only going to be there for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Everybody be trying to work out how to store the petrol up.
Correct.
But this thing is an ongoing thing, or are you saying for a year? What are you going to do?
We do it for 12 months and then we assess it, which is exactly what we did during COVID with JobKeeper. We said, okay, we need to address the economic circumstances that we now face, but we didn't legislate JobKeeper forever, and we're not still paying that because that problem has passed. And so our argument is, what's our vision for our country? Well, it's to help people right now, get them through the next 12 months, the next 24 months. With the gas solution, we believe that can have a big impact by the end of this calendar year. So that can start to relieve some of the pressure of the costs in businesses by the end of this calendar year. And if we need to extend the fuel excise, well, we can assess that at the time. And if petrol's at $2, under us it comes down to $1.75. If the oil price drops and the petrol price comes down to $1.20, $1.50, it's $1.25 under us. And the fixed cost of the excise, which is at 50.4 cents now, that applies whether petrol's 50 cents a litre or it's $5 a litre. But the problem is, because it's been indexed, it's growing off a bigger base each year. So it actually grows at a much faster rate as the years go by. This is the argument in relation to beer excise as well, I might say. And it grows off a bigger base because it's growing off 50 cents, not 30 cents each year. And so it becomes a bigger tax each and every year. And it's the one way in which you can help across the economy, as I say, and it's targeted. It helps the uni student, it helps the pensioner, it helps the self-funded retiree, it helps the small business owner. And that's the thinking that we've applied to it. But you need to fix the problem up, and part of our solution, part of our thinking, as it was for the Howard government, was what changes can you make to modernise and to actually provide some relief to the cost pressures. Because what Australians don't want, but what they're going to get if we end up with an Albanese Bant Labor Greens government, they're going to spend more money. Interest rates are going to go up higher. And the 34% increase in gas now, that's just going to continue to go up over the next 3 years, because their system is going to become more and more costly as you need to roll out the 28,000 kilometres of new poles and wires, which is their energy policy. That's just going to be tens of billions of dollars, which you'll end up, you're starting to pay that now in your power bills. You look at the breakdown of your power bill now, you look at the charges and look at the network charges, you're already paying that as a big part of your electricity bill now.
So just explain to us, because none of us know, how it works in Parliament. If it's an Albanese Bant or Labor and Greens sort of, let's call it a coalition, government going forward, in practical terms, how does that work? So let's say the Greens have got something they're really desperate to push through. What do they walk up to Albanese or Chris Bowen and say, listen, we're here supporting you. Can you get this through, and we'll do a deal? What's the paddle look like down there in the mothership down there in Canberra? What would happen, sort of thing?
Well, the Greens have already been transparent in terms of what their shopping list looks like, at least the first couple of items. One is they want an end to fossil fuels. So that means no gas, no coal. A company like Rio Tinto last year paid about $10 billion worth of company tax and royalties. So without that money, we're not paying for schools and hospitals, but that's the first issue.
Our biggest taxpayer are mining companies. They're our biggest taxpayers.
Yeah, and there's insatiable demand for our product, for our commodity, whether it's iron ore or whether it's coal or whether it's, critical minerals, etc. Otherwise, there's insatiable demand for that around the world, but they want to close that down. That's their first want. And they've been very open. I mean, Adam Bant, I don't give him credit for much because I don't believe in the Greens' philosophy, but he's been very clear that their first, their next request is an abolition of negative gearing.
What?
And sure, and that they've been upfront about that. Now that will be on the table with the Labor Party. Jim Chalmers has already done the research himself to ask Treasury to model it and how much money would they get back if they abolish negative gearing. So we know that they're open to it.
But how's it work, though, Peter? What happens is Bant go up to knock on the door of the Prime Minister?
Yes, they'll sit down in negotiations, and if there's not a clear decision on Saturday night, then remember back to what happened with Julia Gillard when Anthony Albanese was a senior minister and negotiating with the Greens to find a compact between Julia Gillard and the Greens. That's exactly what happened then, and this is why the Prime Minister, even in his own seat, is putting the Greens number 2, and the Greens have put him number 2 as well. I'll always preference the Labor Party ahead of us.
Is this what you mean by when you vote Labor, you're endorsing Greens and effectively voting for the Greens?
Correct.
In other words, you are voting for the Greens' policies.
Yes, and if you're voting 1 for the Green, 2 for the Labor candidate, 3 for the Liberal candidate, well, that will only ever go to the Labor candidate, and that's how they win, because you can't just mark the ballot with number 1.
So, Peter, one of the things that I've been surprised about and somewhat disappointed, to be honest with you, is that there has been a bit of a personality game going on in this campaign. And, you're a hardened ex-copper and businessman, so, I don't know what you did wrong in your life to have to do both, be a policeman first and put up with all that, and then have to become a small business owner and have to put up with all that. But, you get fairly hardened after all that. But irrespective, I sort of know what it's like because you worry about your family. You do have wife and kids and stuff like that who aren't part of all that.
Yeah, of course.
And it's never asked to be either, by the way.
Yes.
And how do you feel right now about the personal attacks on you? Because I actually thought, you remember the old Mr. Potato Head and all that sort of stuff. I mean, whatever, big deal. But it's got much more personal from every level, nearly. How do you feel about that?
It does, and this back to the earlier point about the negative campaign, the personal attacks, because they haven't got a good track record to talk about, and that so their campaign can't be how well you've done under Labor over the last 3 years. So in a two-horse race, their objective is to try and kill off the other horse, and that's why they've run the personal attacks against me. If I'm being honest, it puts fuel in my tank because it just makes me more determined to succeed. And I mean, in business and in life as a police officer, I've been in some pretty tough situations, and I've delivered death messages to parents of kids who have overdosed or have been killed in a car accident, and all of that really makes what I'm going through and the pressure that I'm under, seem pretty manageable. And I've been in, I've responded to domestic situations where women are within an inch of their life, and kids are screaming, and you think back to those circumstances, a detective taking statements from rape victims and people had been exposed to, terrible, terrible crimes. And part of the motivation for why I got into politics was to protect people like that and to make sure that we had less victims and not more. And yes, I mean, maybe that sort of makes you hardened because of those experiences, but it makes me more determined to succeed for our country, because we do live in the best country in the world, and we beat ourselves up over it. And we're told at school now, our kids are told, be ashamed of our history and our place in the world is not legitimate. And all of these people who are teaching our kids that within the education system, which, is a small proportion of teachers, but still the ones that we've seen out marching out on the university campuses, attacking Jewish kids, etc., and then they're turning around and lecturing our kids, in a business course or something. It's a bit of a screwed up world at the moment. But what, for me, I not that it's water off a duck's back, because you do take the attacks and you're only human and all of that. But it does mean to me, what it's worth fighting for, because you want to stand up and fight for what you believe in and what is right. I don't need to tell lies to achieve success at this election, and I'm happy to run on my track record. And yes, there is a huge price that your family pays, and I'm really conscious of that, because my kids, my wife, they haven't put their name on the ballot paper, but they've got the same surname as me, and they suffer, the attacks online. Harry, he's a second year chippy, came with me on the campaign a couple of weeks ago, and just gets bombarded with crap online. But again, he's stoic and resilient enough, and we're a tight family unit where we've supported each other through everything. So they want you to succeed, and I'm really proud of what they've been able to put up with as well. But it shouldn't be the case, but it is, and that's the reality of it. And I'm fortunate that they're strong characters, see them through it as well, and they're proud of what I do, and they know the person that I am, and they know the crap that they read online is nothing like the person I am, and I think that makes them more passionate about making sure that they help me to succeed, because they know that the lies that are being told just don't equate with the dad that they know or the husband that they know.
It's funny. I've got to know you a little bit. I'm fortunate enough to have a dinner with you and my good friend David Coleman some time ago, and then I've had you on podcast. And one of the great things about podcasts is I get to know people without having to spend 20 years with them, but I get it on pretty quickly. And you come across as that quiet, but sort of quite stoic defender style person. You might not be the huge personality and smiling, and so you're not Hollywood, but
that's an understatement. But
you're not Hollywood.
Not the flashy. I'm not the flashy guy.
You're not. But you are. There's a sense. It seems to me that there's in you, and maybe it could have been the reason you became a policeman, perhaps, or you worked as a police person, because you seem like you have a protective element around you. Like you want to not protect us in a silly way, but you want to make sure that our rights are well observed. All of our rights are well observed and managed, whether economic rights or whether they're personal rights. When you're a policeman, they're personal rights. But now as a leader of a party, it's economic rights, personal rights, society, social rights, every other right. There's a stack of them. It seems to me that you have that as an underlying theme in your DNA, in your personality, but not in a flashy way. It's just get the job done.
I think that's right. It's sort of a right and wrong thing, and justice or not. I have again, sort of influenced by what you've seen in life. I worked in the sex offender squad as a detective for a period, and when you see young girls who have their lives destroyed, or you see them later in life and maybe they didn't make a complaint about being sexually assaulted when they were 12 years of age, but you're now talking to them and they're 30 years of age. And I remember clearly in many of those cases where they hadn't been able to form, proper relationships. They changed their patterns of life of, going to the car a different way or not going out of a night time. And I saw the impact on people in that way. And I've been a strong believer all of my life that particularly for kids growing up, that you should be able to enjoy the sanctity of your childhood. You should be able to enjoy that freely and not to be, encumbered with that weight of having been, poorly treated, and whether it's sexual assault or whether it's physical assault or, just brought up in a very difficult circumstance. And so that's sort of the moral compass for me. And similarly in life, it's probably good part of the reason I joined the Liberal Party. My old man was a bricklayer, a builder, and worked his guts out his whole life. And in those Keating, years that you'd spoke about before with the high interest rates, I mean, we'd sit around the kitchen table of a night time, and I've probably told you this story before, but, I'd write out the checks, mum or dad would sign them, and you'd write paid on the invoices and staple them to the statement and file them, etc. So the discussions around that kitchen table, some months where, we don't have money to pay those bills, or we don't have work over the coming weeks to bring money in. And Dad worked hard, and so did Mum, and they did well later in life when we were older, but only because of their hard work. And so for me now, a guiding principle, I suppose, influenced by that time was it kills me to see a small business person who's working 7 days a week, going home doing bookwork of a night time, and just being smashed. And 30,000 small businesses have closed over the last 3 years. More small businesses have closed in our country under Anthony Albanese in the last 12 months than at any 12-month period in our country's history. And I just think it's completely unfair. So I want to do anything I can to help turn around the economy and to manage the economy well, so that there can be a better environment where people can work hard and be rewarded for it. And it's, a similar approach that we've taken in relation to the 25 cent a litre cut on fuel, as we discussed, and the $1,200 back, and then providing the change around the energy system. That's all, in my mind, designed to do the right thing and to provide a productive environment. And I've been heavily influenced by John Howard in my political life, and I think he adopted that same principled approach, and that's what would guide me as Prime Minister.
Some of the things you talked about then gave me one word I can think of that sort of describes a lot of those things. That you have a view against unfairness.
Yes.
Or the system should be as fair as possible.
Yes.
And that means in a broader sense for everybody, the broader community, but also in depth, it should be actually fair. Like it shouldn't be you shouldn't be able to rort it. In other words, and that's sort of not a principle that's always been associated with Liberal. Although, as you said, Howard was very much that type of person.
Yes.
It's more a little bit more towards Labor. Actually, that's their DNA originally. Because I grew up in the west suburbs of Sydney, where everyone voted for Labor. But over time, I think Labor's lost its way. I don't think Labor's the same Labor Party as it was when I was a kid, where they were looking after the working class. And working class, I don't mean someone who's just earning a living, just enough to get by. I'm talking about people who work to earn the money, have to actually go to work and work. Yes. Working class is someone who goes to work. I consider myself still working class. I might have assets, but I go to work every day and I still work. And working class has lost a lot of its respect and fairness. And everybody, whether you're someone with $3 million of assets in your superannuation fund, which you worked your whole life as part of the working class to accumulate,
correct,
it is unfair that you have to pay tax on that at a higher rate than it was originally envisaged when they first seduced you into putting money into super.
Yes. Which you can't take out.
You can't take out.
Yeah.
So it's unfair. So sort of that theme of unfairness, is that something, and as you're the boss of the party, is that something you look for in terms of all your party members? You want to have that sense of fairness for all Australian citizens, whether it's being safe walking home from school to your home, a young girl, young boy, whether it's being concerned about someone sort of, lobbing a missile over the country, in relation to our borders, whether it's the amount of money we pay for our own gas, which is crazy, whether it's the interest rate you pay on your mortgage after you were encouraged to go and borrow as much money as you possibly could during COVID, and, when interest rates are extraordinarily low, now it's extraordinarily high. Is that unfairness something that perhaps you guys stand for? It looks like it's nearly a new position for the Liberal Party under your leadership. And it goes back to the Howard days.
No, I agree with that. And I made the point when I came into the leadership of the party that I didn't see us as the party of big business any longer. Coles and Woolies and others can take care of themselves. Our task, I think, as a Liberal Party is to take care of the small business person and the mum who's working part-time at home in a micro business in a back bedroom or in a garage, and that business, the aspiration is to take that business to be listed one day. Or how do we help the cafe owner who wants to buy a second cafe? Or how do we help the person who's worked really hard, sacrificed, bought a rental property, has 3 kids, wants to end up with 3 rental properties so that they can leave one to each of their kids or to their grandkids, whatever it might be. It is that fairness. As Immigration Minister, I get a bad rap sometimes about being too hard as Immigration Minister, but the approach that I took there was that I cancelled about 6,000 visas of people who were here as non-citizens who had committed rape and pedophilia and had been involved in bikie gangs and distributing drugs. And I allowed in 12,000 Yazidi women, for example, who were being slaughtered by ISIS and ISIL. They've become amazing Australians. And for me, that was how the migration system should work. You should say to people who are, taking the piss, frankly, that you're not here to commit crimes against Australian citizens. And if you do that, out you go. But we bring in good people. And in my mind, that is about fairness. And I think to the point you made before, that the Labor Party at the moment, under this Prime Minister, given that he's so far left, is to how do you please inner city Green voters in Sydney and Melbourne? And they've forgotten about people in the suburbs. And that's why at this election, I think there's a big move going on in the outer metro areas, in regional areas where people feel forgotten. And it also bleeds into the housing debate as well, because one of the things that, and again, it is a fairness thing. And I feel a guilt that our generation had to work hard and save, but got into housing. Housing was much cheaper. Interest rates were much higher, as you pointed out, depending on when you were born. But I want young Australians to get into housing, and I want them to be able to climb that property ladder and, renovate a house or build an extension and sell that house for a profit down the line, or use the house as an asset to start a small business and get a loan from the bank. And we're locking people out of housing at the moment. And a big part of that is—
And that's unfair.
Well, it's completely unfair. And it's actually, I think it generates over time a lot of resentment between homeowners and non-home.
Vision.
Absolutely. And the government, the Prime Minister's happy for people to rent for life, right? Because that's what happens in parts of Europe and in parts of the United States. And unless you are left at home by your family in parts of Europe, you've really got bugger all chance of home ownership. And I don't want that for our country. I want people to have a choice, and I want them to have stability, because if they buy a house, it gives them a stable environment, and they don't, they're not a prospect of being kicked out if they're tenants. They'll start a family then, and they'll start a small business if that's their choice, or they'll use the increased value in the house to then buy some shares and secure their margin loan, or to purchase another property, or whatever it might be. It gives them choices. And if they've paid the house off by the time they've retired, or their mortgage has been paid down, it gives them the sort of retirement that we spoke about before, where they've got dignity after having worked all of their lives. It gives them options to travel and maybe help their kids or grandkids out if they're in need. And the government's brought in 1 million people over the last 2 years, which is a 70% increase on any 2-year period in our country's history. So we've just flooded the market with buyers for homes. And of course, all of those people want a house for their kids and their grandkids, and they're locking Aussie kids out of housing at the moment. And that's why we're saying that we want to cut migration for 2 years until we can get on top of the housing problem. We've also said that for interest on the first $650,000 of your mortgage,
The interest you pay on your loan.
Correct. That becomes a tax deduction for first home buyers for the first 5 years, and that'll help. Average wage earners around about $1,000 a month. So it helps with your application to the bank, because you can service your loan, and it also helps you service the loan when you take the mortgage out after you settle a property, and it takes just a bit of pressure out. It also increases supply, because it's only for new homes, and that will drive the market to build more homes to meet that demand. And we put $5 billion in on the supply side to create 500,000 new homes, so that we can bring more houses into the market so that we're not just increasing demand for houses as Labor's done over the last couple of years. So, if I think about it, the principle behind that is about, equity and fairness and allowing people the opportunity and the option. If they choose not to buy a house, fantastic. But I don't want people to be locked out of housing as they are at the moment.
It's funny, the Liberal Party or the coalition becoming the party of fairness. I mean, who would have thought that Labor would abandon that position and that Liberal would move into that position? Who would have thought? And I know there's nothing. No one's really talked about this, but because it's been a bit of a personal attack on you, most of the narrative, unfortunately, and no one's really had an opportunity to sort of dig into Peter Dutton as to what drives him. And I think that's the one word that comes out of talking to you. You're not flashy. You're not Peter Flash. You're not Hollywood. You're not, polished in that you haven't been through 2 or 3 election cycles. You haven't been the Prime Minister. You're sort of new to the show in that regard. But at the end of the day, that whole concept of fairness is a pretty critical one. For every cohort of voter, if you're 20 to 30, you want a fair go.
Yes.
If you're 30 to 40, you want a fair go. 40, 50, 50, and it goes on. There is not one category that doesn't want a fair shot at it. And it doesn't matter what it is they want to achieve, whether they want to have a small business, they don't want to have a small business, whether they want to travel, whether they want to pay less tax, whether they want to earn more money, they want to work 3 jobs. Fairness cuts across every category in every single cohort. And, I think that's and I'm glad we talked about it. I'm glad I had an opportunity to talk to a second time because I didn't really get that the first time. But the second time, the more you talk, the more I'm getting that out of you. I think it's important. I think we should just cover this off, Peter, if you don't mind. The narrative right now is Labor are going to win. There's no point even turning up. Put your vote in. It's going to be a Greens Labor sort of coalition, let's call it that, after the election on Saturday. But the polls, the national polls seem to be indicating that. But what are you seeing when you go to the various electorates? Are you seeing something different?
A very different picture on the ground, really is. And I think you'll see this turning up in the papers over the next few days because Labor has started to retreat back to defending some of their seats that are at risk. And there are a number, particularly in Victoria and New South Wales, in WA, and even in Queensland now as well. So you watch where the Prime Minister visits seats over the next few days, they're defending seats. The feedback from our marginal seat campaigners and people who have been around the block a few times through a few elections is that the mood at pre-polling has been much more positive than it was at the 2022 election. Remember what happened in 2019? The bookies paid out on Bill Shorten to be the Prime Minister before Election Day on the Friday. And he ended up, even though the national polls were showing that he would win, he ended up losing. And the coalition won that election, and
Chris Bowen was a big part of the loss.
Well, he told people.
Of course, he talked about negative gearing, capital gains tax, and franking credits going.
Exactly, and this again, this is a long-held view of the Labor Party in relation to negative gearing and capital gains tax discount, etc. They see it as the rich getting a benefit off renters. It's the same reason they've got contempt for small business people or for employers. They've got a militant union thinking that you employ people and you're there to exploit them, not that you're there employing people and you're giving them a wage which is helping them put their kids through school and pay off their mortgage, and you're taking care of your employees, which is the case for most employers. That's the thinking. So in some of those seats now, and I think you'll see this play out over the next few days, there is a change in sentiment and there is a momentum that's coming back to the Liberal Party over the course of the last 4 or 5 days. And it comes up in the seat-by-seat polling, which the national polling doesn't pick up because you've got a really popular local member who's sitting and has really worked hard. In the next seat, you've got somebody who has just been lazy, hasn't worked hard, and you've got a Liberal candidate who's door-knocked 10,000 homes, and they've got a real following. And so when you look at it seat by seat, there is a pathway to victory for us by Saturday night. And I honestly believe that that's where it's tracking, that's where it's trending. And there's also the question people have to ask, and this has been asked at elections and been a famous campaign theme over a long period of time here and other parts of the world. Are you better off today than you were 3 years ago? I don't know any Australian that I've met over the course of this campaign who says thumbs up, absolutely. In fact, the opposite. People just say, look, it's really tough and we've gone backwards. Everything's gone up and everything will go up even further if there's another 3 years of Labor, and particularly if they're in cahoots with the Greens as well. And I don't want that for our country. I want a better way forward. We are better economic managers. We have the ability to manage money and to spend it wisely, to bring pressure down on inflation so we can bring interest rates. If we can bring interest rates down by a couple of percent, that will create a lot of headroom for families pretty quickly. But if Labor spends money like they've spent over the last couple of years, particularly with the Greens urging them on, then that will see inflation stay higher for longer. And even if interest rates stay high without going up compared to what they could come down under a Liberal government, then that's going to really put a lot of families to the wall. I was talking to a bloke yesterday up in Robertson where Lucy Wicks is running for us. He's got a mate of his who didn't want to speak to us but wanted his story conveyed. He reckons he's 25 points, 0.25 of 1% away from losing his house. If they go up by another 25 points, he's done. And
he won't be able to meet the payments.
He just won't be able to meet the repayments, and they'll have to they'll sell the house. And that, I think, is a more common story than what the bookies and others are picking up at the moment. And I think a lot of those people say, you know what, I may not like every part of the Liberals' policy, or I may not like Peter Dutton for this reason or that reason, but I know that he'll be a strong leader, and I know that he's got the business experience and the experience in the defence portfolio and the health portfolio and the immigration portfolio and home affairs to make the decisions that need to be made for our country to fix the economy and get inflation down and help address the cost of living standards, and also to keep us safe. We live in a very uncertain time and we have to invest in defence and also into protecting our borders. So I've been really big on this over the course of the campaign. We've announced a $750 million plan to set up task forces to crush the bikie gangs and other gangs who are involved in the tobacco wars and the illicit tobacco, the gangs who are buying the cars off kids who steal them out of your house, and the kids who are buying drugs off the bikies to fuel that, to pay for that drug habit they're breaking into your house. So I'm going to reduce crime across communities as well as keeping us safe in the regions, and we've got the ability to be able to do that.
It's interesting you mentioned hardworking Liberal members in some of the various electorates you've been visiting, and I immediately thought of three. I thought of first off, I thought of Scott Young in the seat of Bennelong. I mean, my God, like the guy, and I did have him on the show, but he did work for me many years ago, but that's irrelevant. I got him because I wanted to highlight what type of person he is, even though he's been sort of harangued as a Chinese, whatever. He's more Aussie than anybody will ever meet.
Of course he is, and great bloke.
But the guy, when he was working for me, he was in a ridiculously hard. He probably would have been the longest hour, spent the most hours working in my organisation of any other person of his equivalents in our organisation, and he's doing that right now in his electorate. Ro Knox, who was on here today, and Ro's incredibly talented and unbelievably bloody hard worker. And you mentioned Andrew Constance, who's always been a favourite of mine. Andrew's incredibly hard-working guy, and supremely decent and good.
Yes,
like really good values. I mean, for those sort of people to be in government, for me anyway, and I don't know the other people who they're going against. I'm not having a crack at the people they're going against. I'm just talking about those individuals. Three Liberals got it, but there's three people I know, and I can genuinely say I've known them for a long time. They are brilliant and hardworking. Australia is about hard work, and you work hard and you get paid well, and you pay some tax, but you shouldn't get penalised for your hard work.
100%.
And that's part of our DNA.
Yeah,
and that's fair. That's fairness. And those three people are exactly. I mean, David Coleman's another good example.
Yes,
but they're exactly the types of people we want. I would like to see in government, and they're in your team.
Mate, I'm so proud to have them in my team, and there are many more. But you look at somebody like Scott. mum started with nothing, great migrant story. Again, just worked hard, has built himself up. Would be like he's just door knocked on literally thousands of doors, and the people he speaks to just say, "Wow, what an impressive young guy!" And he has a real shot in Bennelong. It's a tough seat, but I think he can win. Ro Knox is, I mean, she's smart, talented, a great intellect, has been successful in business. Like exactly the sort of person you'd want in a seat like Wentworth and in the Parliament. And Andrew Constance, you look at what he did over, bushfires and
amazing.
Like, he is like he bleeds for his community, and he's really passionate about helping people, particularly people who are in their darkest hour, and he's proven that. Like he's got those runs on the board, and he's a great candidate in Gilmore. And similarly, David Coleman, who's now our shadow foreign affairs spokesman, he would represent our country on the world stage like very few people could. He's got a great talent, and he's worked hard in his local community. He's respected by all the multicultural groups, and he's built up his margin over a period of time, which reflects the fact that people locally respect him.
So you've covered off your policies, and you've magically weaved it into our discussion, which is that's your job, and you've done a good job at every opportunity you had to weave into the discussion. Those ideas. One of the things I expected you would. So one of the things I thought I'd do is ask you to comment on some of Labor's policies, but I don't want to look like a flag waving liberal. So I went into artificial intelligence, went into AI, and I don't mind telling you, I went into Copilot. Copilot's my favorite AI place to go, and I asked Copilot, what are the five main policies of the Labor Party that Anthony Albanese has espoused over the past 3 months? And I'm going to put the five to you because he's not here to put them to the audience. So I'm going to put them to you. And if you like, you can make a comment on them. And this is our last part of the discussion. The first one is housing. And it goes, the $10 billion Housing Australia Future Fund it's a future fund, aims to build 100,000 homes for first home buyers over the next decade. The initiative is part of a broader housing strategy, including the Help to Buy scheme and the National Housing Accord, which targets 1.2 million new homes in Australia by 2029. Would you care to comment?
Well, just if you look at sort of the actions as opposed to the words, their signature housing policy, whilst it's got some houses under construction at the moment, not one has been completed in 3 years. So not one house has been brought to market. They've fueled demand, as we said before. Like they've just put 1 million buyers into the market, 1 million renters, and they've made it harder for Australians. Their focus is on community housing as opposed to providing support to first home buyers. They talk about the 5% deposit policy. It was actually introduced by the Liberal government, and we want to continue that policy. So there's common ground between the two parties now on that issue. In relation to the fund that you spoke about, this is in part what Standard & Poor's talked about, these off-budget funds, and that's in part what's contributing to the risk of our credit rating at the moment. And the government's talking about putting $100,000 into building, a home. You can't do a renovation for $10,000, and you don't get much of a renovation anymore for $100,000 with the price that the
bathroom and kitchen goods cost.
Well, that's right. And so I don't know what sort of homes they're going to build for $100,000, but it obviously, and they haven't outlined the detail, but it's obviously some sort of subsidy that they subsidise the construction of a home. So frankly, I just don't think it'll ever happen. But it sounds flashy when you've got a $10 billion, future housing fund. I just think look at the reality of the last 3 years, and housing, the housing crisis is just really, I think it's been devastating for a lot of young Australians. Young Australians are putting off having kids, and older Australians, parents and grandparents, even though they've worked hard, provisioned for their own retirement, are staying in the workforce longer now because they've got to help the kids with monthly repayments or with a deposit. So that's that'd be my critique of their policy.
The second thing that AI come up with is cost living. It says Labor's modest. This obviously is about as unbiased as you can get because it's Unless the AI is hallucinating, which it can do from time to time, but it says the cost of living, Labor's modest tax cuts start in 2026, 2027, that's next year, and they're designed to provide gradual relief, doubling in value by 27, 28. What would you have to say about Labor's cost of living measures?
Well, it's the contrast here is that Labor's saying 70 cents a day by way of a tax cut starting in 15 months' time. So let's say, $4.90, let's say $5 a week, $260 a year. That's what they're promising you by way of tax cut. Our alternative is to say, starting from day one, we want to lower petrol by 25 cents a litre. So you're saving $14 a tank, $28 a week for a two-car family, $1,500 a year. And that then is followed up by the $1,200 tax rebate. If there are two of you in the family, $2,400 for the year. So you end up with a net benefit over that period of, depending on the family circumstances, but let's say $3,900. It takes you a lot of weeks at $5 a week under Mr. Albanese's plan to match what we've got on the table. And as I say, we then fix the system up so that we can bring the prices down. Mr. Albanese is promising the $150 energy rebate, but not fixing the root problem. So he promised before the last election energy costs had come down by $275, and they've gone up by $1,300. So we want to fix, it's a bullet on a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. We want to fix the underlying problem as well as provide immediate relief. And the 70 cents a day, $5 a week in 15 months' time, I just think if you're out there talking to families at the moment who have, deciding not to insure their car because they just can't afford to pay the premium, I think they'd say, you know what, I'll probably take the help now.
And the third point that AI gave me was on energy, and it says the Labor Party wants to continue to invest in renewable energy projects, and this aligns with Labor's climate goals, focusing on reduction of emissions and transitioning to cleaner energy sources. Have you got a comment on?
Well, we're all in favour of zero emissions by 2050, or reducing our emissions and being responsible. And we're an exporter, and we export to Europe and other countries, and there'll be a requirement ongoing for us to have sensible policies in place. But this, as I said before, it has been a wrecking ball going through the economy. And have a look at what's happening in parts of Europe, or what happened when Ukraine was attacked by Russia. Germany and France and other countries were all of a sudden worried about energy security. There are reports out of Spain at the moment. I don't know the cause of those blackouts there, but no economy can function without reliable power. And the Prime Minister and Chris Bowen want to pretend that solar and offshore wind and green hydrogen, that'll keep the lights on. It just won't. And this is why people who've got solar panels at the moment are starting to find that they're being penalised because the sun shines during the day and they can pump energy into the network, and they were paid a reasonable tariff not too long ago. But now the battery technology hasn't got to a point where it can store energy to keep the fridges running or the air conditioning unit running overnight. And we have to have a baseload power, and we have to firm up the renewable power. We need 24/7 power. The hospitals need it. Cold rooms need it. Mining needs it to pay the taxes. Every part of our society, energy is the economy. And so yes, they're signed up to a renewables only policy, but it's killing the economy. And that's if you ask me what's the biggest single factor as to why grocery prices have gone up by 30%, I think it's the energy policy. And as I say, it's not just your power bill at home that's going up, it's the farmer, and it's the cold storage provider, and it's a transport operator, and it's everybody who's paying more and more for electricity and gas. And that's why we want to address gas and electricity costs and bring them down.
The fourth one it says is education. So AI says education, it says the expansion of free TAFE programs is set to benefit over 600,000 Australians, addressing skill shortages and boosting workforce participation. Got a comment on that?
Well, as we discussed before, nothing the government does is free. So for somebody to be paid to go to do a course, another taxpayer is paying that. So somebody who's just finished their degree or just finished their apprenticeship, they're the ones who are paying for it through their taxes. Now, I'm a really strong supporter of young Australians deciding what is best for them. If that's uni, that's great. but you're not a failure if you don't go to uni, which is sort
100%.
of the Labor ethos. You should be encouraged to do a trade if that's what's important. What we've said is we're going to set up and invest further into the Australian trade colleges instead of the TAFE model. It allows kids in year 10 and 11 and 12 to start their apprenticeship and get some of that underway by the time they leave school. They can get paid for part of it. They're developing skills. And in addition to that, we're putting $12,000 into a wage subsidy for trainees and for apprentices so that employers see them as more attractive and will employ more apprentices, particularly in the construction sector as well.
And the final one is health. Labor has committed, and this is going to rankle you as Medicare, but Labor has committed $8.5 billion to Medicare, aiming to have 90% of GP visits, that's visits to the doctor, bulk billed by the end of the decade. I presume he means 2030. This includes funding for urgent care clinics and women's health initiatives. What do you say about?
Well, some of the government's claims at the moment in relation to health, as it pointed out before, are just completely overblown. So, when I was health minister, the bulk billing rate was 84%. It went up, and the Prime Minister makes this point that it went up over the course of COVID because more people were doing telehealth consults, etc., getting vaccinations. It went up to 88%. Today, it's at 77%, so down 11 points. And Australians are finding it hard to get into a doctor. So, as a dad, as somebody who uses the health system, obviously myself, I want to make sure that we can have a really strong primary care network because that stops people from going to hospitals and presenting at emergency departments. It means that there's earlier detection of cancers, and it means you can be treated much earlier. And blokes in particular, I might say, should go to the doctor more regularly. Women are much better at going to the doctor more regularly. And we need to invest in training of GPs because we've got an ageing workforce. More GPs are getting older and retiring. And also it's less attractive as a specialty compared to obstetrics or gynecology or to other specialties where people can make more money. So we've got to properly pay the doctors. So we support additional investment into Medicare, and we've been very clear about that. We've doubled the number of psychology sessions, which Labor cut in half because particularly for young kids with complex psychological needs, we need to get them with more support, not less. And we've made a big investment into GP training. We've worked with the Australian Medical Association and the Royal Australian College of General Practice to come up with that plan. So a very strong supporter of general practice, and there's probably some similarities between where Labor's at the moment and us. I just think we can manage the economy more effectively, which means that we can ultimately invest more into health, and that can help keep people, healthier and detect particularly those cancer types earlier, which means the survival rates are much higher.
But just so anyone listening or watching can get it clear, you're not going to smash Medicare.
No.
Where's that coming from?
But it's their scare campaign, and they ran it. Remember, they ran it before Tony Abbott got elected, and they ran it before Scott Morrison got elected. They ran it before John Howard got elected, and before Malcolm Turnbull was elected, there was this Medicare campaign that we were going to privatise Medicare. I remember older Australians coming up to us on the booth crying, saying, I voted for you for all of these years. Why are you going to sell Medicare? And it proved to be a complete and utter fabrication. Like they were misleading and lying to elderly Australians, scaring them. And that is part of their campaign again now. I just think Australians realise it's a con job, and the Prime Minister is saying all of this because he can't get re-elected on his track record, and throw the mud, run the scare campaigns, tell the lies. That's how you get elected, and that's what this election is about. And I intend to make sure that that's not the case, and I want to stand up for our country. I want to make sure that we're safe and secure. I want to make sure we can get our country back on track as well as the economy and help people live their lives again. I want to. We've had seven consecutive quarters, so 21 months of negative household growth. That is, households have been in recession for almost 2 years under this government. And as I said earlier, the biggest drop in living standards that Australians have experienced, and people know it. And they're the stories we've heard, the tears that we've seen when we've spoken to families who are working their guts out and just going backwards at the moment. And people aren't better off today than they were 3 years ago, and people can't afford 3 more years of a bad government. It will end up like Victoria, but at a national level, when you get a second term. The first term looked bad, but the second term is when they really consolidate the bad decisions and lock in the debt that might be paid off for a generation. And let's change the government now and get things sorted.
And just as you could help me out, because you're a political scientist, and I don't mean in terms of academia, but you are a political scientist in that that's the game you work in. Just an observation, and maybe you could help me out though. It seems to me what most people aren't thinking about is for this election is that Labor is about big government, because they take the view, and rightly or wrongly, I know what my position is, but everyone will have a different position. But big government movements like Labor take the view that government make the best decisions for everybody. So how you live your life, I'll sort it out. I'll build the rules around how you live. Like COVID's a good example, which is what happened to Victoria.
Yes.
We as a government are better making decisions about how you live your life. Therefore, as a result of that, we will build government out bigger and bigger and bigger if you vote us in. But you're going to have more rules, more regulation. If you're in a small business, you're going to have to abide by many more rules as to how you've got to administer your business. You've got to collect the tax, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. Whereas the Liberal program has been, obviously government, you've got to have rules, but smaller government. And the vote for Labor, in my opinion, and if you are someone who's going to vote for Labor, in my opinion, you are voting for big government. And by voting for big government, the job of someone in working government is to make more rules. And that's what governments do. They govern. They make rules. And they make more rules and more rules and more rules. And when it comes to working out whether I'm better off today compared to what I was, say, 3 years ago, I just know there's a whole lot more rules around than there was 3 years ago. Just take economics aside.
Yes.
And is the Liberal Party still stand for, let's call it smaller government relative to what Labor does?
The short answer is yes. And I think you're right in your analysis. It's just a philosophical and ideological difference between the two parties.
And everybody can make their own decision about this, but they should know.
Of course, yeah. So look, the Liberal Party approach is to, knowing that we're spending taxpayers' money to pay the wages of public servants in Canberra, is to make sure that the money is spent efficiently. So let's get the best bang for our buck, and let's make sure that we're employing people who are making it easier for you to navigate government services or get the services that you are relying on from government. One of the reasons I think that we've established a lot of inefficiency and why we're passing a lot of cost on to the end user, say in the construction sector, I think is a good example. The Labor government will always try and please the unions. So the CFMEU's donated $12 million since Anthony Albanese became Labor leader. They've let the CFMEU, largely go untouched. The CFMEU workplace now is at about 2.4 days a week. So, and as we said earlier, we discussed this, you end up paying, twice the amount to construct a building. And it's why the cost of a 2-bedroom unit has gone up so dramatically, and why it's cost a lot of people additional holding costs. So the developer buys the block of land. The government used to approve that development application in, say, 3 months. It now takes 3 years or 6 years. And so the costs of that interest ultimately get paid by the young couple who's buying the 2-bedroom unit. And the reason why that's blown out is because government has expanded. And when you bring new public servants on, they look for new things to do.
That's their job.
Exactly. And they don't find efficiency. They find reasons to prolong the discussion. And we need to consider more factors, and we need more reports, and you need to pay the consultants more and more. And that's what's driven up the cost. And the Labor government's employed an extra 41,000 public servants in Canberra. And to put that into perspective, on a per capita basis, and it's a really interesting graph, I think it was in The Economist just recently, but Australia has the highest number of public servants per capita compared to any other country, including European countries, in the world. And that means that it's grown at about 3 times the rate under this government compared to when Julia Gillard and Kevin Rudd were in government last. So that is a pretty phenomenal growth number. Now, if you're talking a wage bill there of over $7 billion a year, you think what you can do for that. You can drop petrol by 25 cents a litre, cost you $6 billion a year. You can provide
Permanently.
You could provide more support to defence. You could give more funding to roads. You could provide more support in aged care. There are a lot of things that you can do for that money. And if you can deliver a more efficient service and you can make it easier and less costly to deal with government, you end up reducing the overall costs that have to be complied or paid for to comply with the government regulations. And that's a big difference between the two parties. The Commonwealth Public Service Union, of course, applaud the Albanese government for employing more public servants in Canberra because they get to clip the ticket and they get to collect the union fees, and then the CPSU pay the union fees to the Labor Party to help them campaign. That's their business model. I want an efficient public service, and I want a smaller government, and I want people to be able to make decisions that are right for them and right for their families and right for their businesses. And I'm not interested in having to tell you whether you turn left or right coming out of your bedroom, or whether you are allowed to serve up that cereal in the morning, or whether you're allowed to do this or that in your life. I want you to make those decisions. And that's the big difference between the two parties. The Labor Party believes in a command and control model, and that's
They believe they're better off at making decisions than we are as individuals.
Yes. And again, because it's a trust thing. They don't trust business owners because they think they're there to exploit workers, as we said before. They want to give a model where people can rent for life because that means that you've got you're not empowering a landlord who's got that subservient relationship. They want the super funds to own the houses that people live in. And give them, a rent for life model. And they're fundamental differences between the two parties.
And that sort of takes us around sort of that territory of socialism, because that's sort of the philosophy of socialism.
Yes.
And all these things, apart from being inefficient, end up costing us more money. So it makes the whole business cycle inefficient. Just so I'm clear, though, any public servant who's listening to this doesn't mean that if Dutton gets in, he's going to go and fire everybody.
No, look at what we did again when we were in government. We found efficiencies and we did reduce the overall number of public servants, as we're proposing at this election as well. But we're at a sensible, sustainable model and trying to get that balance right. As I say, where people are working harder and paying more tax, they want to know that it's being spent efficiently. And if they think we're just employing public servants in Canberra to please the union, as the Labor Party has done, well, that's not an efficient use of your money. If you're making an application to be, a pensioner, or if you're working in the Department of Defence, you want to know that they're the most streamlined processes going. And we should be encouraging the state governments and the councils to do that as well, and encourage them to be efficient in the taxes that they're applying and the public servants that they're employing and the way in which they spend their taxes as well. And sometimes the Commonwealth Government can incentivise state governments to try and cut waste and try and condense timelines for approvals, etc. Not abandon environmental considerations, etc. But it takes 16 years in our country now for a mine to be approved. What's happening there? Well, those companies like Rio are just taking money, they're putting it into Africa, they're putting it into Asia, North America. We lose the jobs, we lose the taxes, and we would end up being more environmentally responsible in that mining operation than what would happen in Africa. And so we don't improve the overall emissions, across the world, and we do ourselves out of huge revenues. And we could be building more schools, or we could be providing, more GPs. They're the fundamental differences, I think, between the two parties.
So, Peter, the election's on in 4 days from now. It's the last run home. You've got like 100 metres to go. It looks like there's you've got to catch up. You've got to really put your stride out. What are you going to say to Australians now? I mean, why vote for the coalition?
We're going to work hard right up until election night, because I believe we can win the election. And I believe we can win it because not just of the track record of the last 3 years and how hard that's been for a lot of families, but probably more importantly because of what we've got on offer. And that is a positive plan It's about providing immediate assistance, and it's the 25 cent a litre cut. It's the $1,200 back. It's fixing up the energy system straight away, and it's fixing the economy so that the economy can be working for people, not that people are slaves to the economy. I want to create an environment where we can support families and help small businesses grow again, where we can bring inflation down so that we can bring interest rates down, and we can be a safe society as well. I want people to be safe in their own homes. I want them to be safe in their communities. And I want us to be safe as a country in a very uncertain century. And we have the experience to be able to do that. And we have the capacity, when you look at the front bench and Angus Taylor and Jane Hume and others who are very accomplished people in their own business lives, etc., they bring a lot of experience to the table as well. And we have the ability to clean up this mess of the last 3 years and help bring down the cost of petrol, of power, of electricity and gas. And we can help rebuild the economy. And that's exactly what Liberal governments have done after bad Labor governments before.
Peter Dutton, thanks for giving our audience a better sense of who Peter Dutton really is.
My pleasure, Mark. Thank you very much.
Thank you.